This is Richard Lyons, and you are on the Break It Down show.
Yes, we're here and we're talking to Richard. We tried to do this on Wednesday, and technology and all the different aspects of technology. Exciting. So I appreciate you scheduling with me and having a good Friday morning chat.
Yes, it's great to be here. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. So you've been on the show a couple of times, constantly talking about democracy and democracy in its truest sense, not Democrats, not Republicans, but actual the freedom and the system that we've built. And so you've brought us this latest book. I'll put the link up here in a second. It's already in the show notes if you guys look in the comments. The Shadow of the Acropolis. This is volume 2. So tell us what this book is about.
Well, insofar as the volume 1, the DNA of democracy, described how we came to be our democracy, in volume 2, Shadows of the Acropolis, it notes how we've drifted away from uh, the original design since 1900. So it chronicles that in episodic form for a century.
Okay, so it chronicles the form. What was in volume 1 then?
In volume 1 is how our democracy is composed of all the democracies that went before it. So it begins actually with the Israelites gaining their freedom from Egypt. It goes to Greece, it goes to Rome, it goes to England, and then it goes to the Iroquois societies of America. And part of our government is based on the Iroquois of the Northeast.
The as I was thumbing through the book, and I didn't get a chance to finish the whole thing. There's quite a bit of work in here, and lots of references. How long does it take you to write one of these things?
2 years per book.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep, it's an undertaking. But I became. I've always loved history. I've done other books. I became aware of just how people don't understand in America what a democracy is, how it's formed, and why it's so rare, why it's so fragile. So I wanted to get that into the first volume, DNA of Democracy. And now we're seeing how fragile a democracy can be by the shift our government has been taking over the past 100 years away from its pure form.
One of the things I always wonder about, like when we talk about, gosh, it happens all the time, where there'll be some kind of political narrative, and it's like, hey, we're doing a terrible job with this. The people that are doing these things are terrible. And then I'm like, who are we talking about specifically? Because exactly. The president from the U.S. has been so bad. I mean, who was the last non-felon that was president of the United States, for crying out loud? It's been a while.
We should just have that as basic criteria,
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. And so it's not, this is far beyond like Democrats or Republicans. This is really about the system and how it works and what really is a democracy.
Exactly.
So what's a democracy?
A democracy is a place where the individual is sovereign and the state is the servant, as opposed to every other kind of government where the state is sovereign and the individual is subject. So in Shadows of the Acropolis, what I'm chronicling is the shift away from a diffused power system, which we enjoyed, let's say, in 1910, and how power has become more and more concentrated in Washington, D.C., in one branch of government. And this is contrary to our constitutional foundation. And so that's why we're feeling tension. That's why we're feeling divided. It's why half the country is absolutely incensed, no matter who the president is, depending on what side the president's on, because that office holds so much power. People feel they're unrepresented when they don't have their president in power. It's become that concentrated.
Yeah, I before the last presidential election, it doesn't matter who wins. More than half of us are going to be pissed off and think the election was
right.
And it's easy to dismiss. It's a joke. It's easy to dismiss 70 million people who said no thanks, but there's also 70 million people in the other direction that we're not doing this right, man. And so there's responsibility with democracy. Right? Like if this is, taking the we've talked about this in the past, taking Democrat and Republican, or Republic and Amos at their roots. Res publica, democratia. This
Yes.
means we have the power. Like, this is our thing.
Yes. And so, well, I'll take up two issues with that. One is the most necessary thing in a democracy is knowing what it is, and knowing what your power as an individual should be. So as our country was founded, most of the power in the country resided at the local level, and then the state level. And the place with the least amount of power was the federal government. And in the federal government, the president concerned himself with foreign affairs more than domestic, right? The domestic affairs were handled in the House of Representatives at the federal level. So now that's the inversion has happened, where most decisions are made at the executive branch of the federal level. Let's take what Biden just did a week ago. Biden decided that $500 million should be transferred from persons who owed that money owing to the education they signed up for, and transferred that debt to every taxpayer in America. Now, the tax-paying population in America is only about 40%, right, who pay income taxes. So you're shifting a burden of $500 billion from one population to another with a sweep of one person's pen. It had nothing to do with the House of Representatives, who are supposed to tax and supposed to be the spending organ of government. One person with one pen decided $500 billion was to be paid for by persons who got no benefit from that. How does that happen? That's not supposed to happen. It's an assumption of constitutional control.
And literally, the day he's doing this, not a statement against the court.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Pete.
Yeah, I was just saying, this is not a statement for or against Democrats, but as he's doing it, he's also saying this is probably not legal, but they'll have to go deal with that in the court. So he's doing something he knows to be illegal.
Right. They don't care.
It does it anyhow. And that's not what I don't care what party you're from. That's not what I want from the president. I want the president to be an executive, to run things, to guide. Hey, Congress, I need you to do your job,
Yes. And stick to your job. What's he doing in Congress's business?
All right. So when we look at,
that's the main problem, Pete.
Yeah. Right. Congress. Listen, I've been saying this a lot. If Pete was president, one of the things I would start doing is every day I'd tell Congress, every day I'm tearing up an executive order. So you guys better get to work.
You deal with it. And
yeah, I want one item, if at all possible, one item bills. And I want them to be bipartisan. Bipartisan, if they need me to lay out what bipartisan is, I'm glad to do it. Otherwise, that thing's going right in my pocket, and they can forget about it, and they'll have to unite to override my veto, right? So
that's how the country was designed.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I might make some mistakes along the way as president, but it's going to be driven by the folks that have the checkbook and write the laws. They're going to have to do their job. And my job is to guide them in the direction I'd like them to go and build consensus and give us a vision forward.
Imagine that.
So why don't we do this? Like, how did we get in this mess? How did we get so far away from what a democracy is supposed to be?
That is exactly what I expressed and explained in 460 pages that you're holding in your hand. It's exactly that subject. How did we get to where we are today? So today, let's take the headlines today. You have Biden shutting down the fossil fuel industry and creating raging inflation. You have a wide open border on the southern border. You have a former president's residence being invaded by the FBI. And what we talked about student loans. These are all symptoms of one problem. It's a single problem. It is the investment in the executive branch of the federal government with too much power.
Yeah. So
much power that they don't care how they trample on the Constitution because there is no answer. The Republicans are they're a complaint department in the Congress. I mean, they have no real power to bring anybody to task for these breakings of the Constitution.
Yeah. Nothing is more flaccid than Lindsey Graham yelling at somebody in Congress It's
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm glad you got the camera on your face. What are you going to do about this, right?
Good key question. What are you going to do? You're asking the
Yeah.
you're asking the agencies who defend certain executives and attack others to attack themselves, to investigate themselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
So, and what we've seen is an erosion of our institutions, right? And so the FBI, and this, I'm just going to be pointed in this. Look, I was a counterintelligence agent, right? I know about classification protection. So the FBI goes and they determine that Secretary Clinton has a bunch of top secret SCI on her server. Nothing, no big deal. Actually, it's a huge deal. There's actual laws and everything set up on what you're required to do. First off, she goes to jail, and so does a lot of her staff. Second,
But Pete, as a person at that level that you were in, that's the first thing you learn, isn't it?
oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
and there's no like, I know. Like,
Right.
they've accounted for all of this, and not only that, once you have this classified information outside of the control stream, look, we're desperately trying to control the control stream anyhow. Like everything that's classified, we're trying to protect that. We're trying to limit access to it, right?
There's a reason.
Yeah, to include Americans. And so when it leaves that protection, now you're required by law to investigate where did it go? Who got killed? What other secrets have been compromised, right? Because you have to clean house. You have to figure out where is the breach. And then, again, if you have two different members of Congress that have significant ties to Chinese espionage, one of them sleeping with one and the other one hiring as chief of staff, it means that there's more than, this is not a Democrat thing. It means that there's a whole bunch of them in Congress. Because as a spot, my job is to go out and find people in Congress, right, for some country I'm targeting for America. If I got to have a source that worked on the as chief of staff for a long time senator, that would make my career, and they would spend millions of dollars allowing me to run this operation for as long as I possibly could and to expand it.
Yes.
Right? And we're supposed to believe that none of that matters, and now we're going to be upset about Donald Trump and his classified. Look, I want people to protect classified. I'm not giving Donald Trump a pass here, but because the government has too much power, they've ignored their own rules.
They decide what the rules are as they go nowadays. So, and this all goes back, if you don't mind, this goes back to a chapter in my book called Leviathan's Privilege, which equal justice versus Leviathan's privilege. This all started back with the Clintons back in the 90s. You'll be surprised. It began with the Clintons. And they're getting into bed with Makte Riadi and his family in the lead up to Clinton's first election. And their conduct in breaking down all the COCOM regulations against exportation of sensitive technology to tyrannical states. Clinton got rid of all those rules so that he could export satellite technology to China back in the 90s. And this sort of thing has been occurring ever since. And the whole of the DOJ hid evidence rather than producing it. They stonewalled the Congress from investigating it. This all goes back to the 90s.
Yeah. Well, and it's in the 90s, it's in the 80s. And, it always happens. So the other day I had a guy on the show, his name's David Petrusha, and he writes incredible histories, and he kind of focuses on like a year. So this one's 1936. It's called Roosevelt Sweeps the Nation. He already had his show, but everybody should watch that. And as I'm reading through all of like the political machinations and all of the rhetoric that's being thrown around, I'm like, oh my God, it's the same exact thing, but times version of it. All the same arguments, just slightly, same topics, right? But just that era's version of it. And so you see that like this whole thing has been going on and taking power away from people. So let me make the example a little bit more complicated. I have also been reading a lot of Laura Ingalls Wilder stuff because I'm fascinated by that lady and how some farm girl from the country ended up being this international icon who still today makes money, right? And so she's talking about, and she was a libertarian. And so she's talking about how like the New Deal, she wasn't a fan of all that stuff, but all these little towns in the South are competing for people so they can get business and so they can survive and thrive. And that means roads. And here we have the New Deal. But if your politician isn't better than Huey Long or, whoever's going to be in New York, you might lose money because your person can't compete. And so now instead of it being a federal asset, which is a great idea, it becomes it becomes controlled by power and influence and charm. And so the road that's supposed to go through town and it all of a sudden turns left and goes somewhere else or never exists, right?
Yes.
It has to be funded some other way.
Correct. And this Shadows of the Acropolis goes into that subject and how, by way of the income tax, rather than everybody taking care of their own state and their own locality as they would choose, as they would vote, right, in elections, that power was assumed through the income tax to the federal government, who took the wealth of the entire country, and more so with FDR than at any other period, took the wealth of the entire country and decided in Washington who would get money back. In one place, they decided that, not in 50 states, not in 1,000 localities. Where are we going to put the road?
Yeah.
That was decided from then on in Washington, D.C. That is a tremendous amount of power. Unbelievable power. And you have lobbyists and you have politicians vying for who gets money back out of the gorged pig.
Right.
So it's tremendous power that we lost as citizens, we lost as localities, we lost as states over the past century.
One of the things I realized as I drove through the South this past summer, Selma, and one of Selma's biggest earning machines is civil rights. And so if you go there as like a civil rights tourist, you can spend a little bit of money in that town. You look on Main Street and the businesses, they're not healthy. Sure, there's a cafe over here and there and that kind of thing. But a lot of those, Main Street Selma, this is right by the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they're boarded up on Main Street, boarded up businesses that they can't keep open. The next town, I've been talking about this, the next town west, doesn't even have a gas station, right? And so this policy, it could just be because you're penalizing somebody because of a party they're from at the federal level, and so you turn off funding or shut their base, which is what happened in Selma, and for decades, there's nothing there except for whatever. It's back to agrarian society, and these people,
all the wealth was taken from those who earned it.
Yeah,
none given back. So. Okay. It's a problem. So again, it's all these are symptoms, Pete, and there's one cause. It's the overconcentration of power in one place that controls all the money and controls how it's distributed. And I go into FDR's, bringing up the New Deal, the manner in which the federal government has, since the New Deal, invaded the private free enterprise markets. I started with utilities back then. You're seeing it now in Biden's, with a sweep of a pen. He has decided that the fossil fuel industry should be crippled. And I mean crippled beyond being able to survive.
Right.
Obama did it with the coal industry. FDR did it with takeovers of the utility industry. There was a place called Southern and Common. Can't remember the name right now. But he just set about to destroy it. It was a operation that was working in the Southeast at the time, and he replaced it with the Tennessee Valley Authority, Commonwealth and Southern. He decided as one man and his agencies, through his agencies, he decided he was going to destroy that company and assume it to the federal government. That is a precedent that the Democratic Party has set, and they use it every time. They demonize persons in industries they want to destroy. Like you can take the insurance companies and the health insurance companies. They are the great demon. They must be destroyed. Government must take over that job. Right. Fossil fuel companies. No, we have to change our entire energy structure in order to get rid of the fossil fuel industry. And who gets the money? Who gets all this money? It's friends and interested parties in Wall Street.
Definitely not the people, right?
Well, what's good for the people is low fuel prices.
Yeah.
Let them keep their money. I mean, this is affected. You have 8% of the GDP, 8% of the economy, the energy sector. It influences the entire other 92%. All prices go up when fuel prices go up. And so that's where we are. Sweep of a pen.
And that not a lot of forethought or
No, they thought about it. No, they thought they've been thinking about it since the New Deal.
Okay, let me
Know what they're doing.
One of the things in the military, not that the military is the example of everything, but I think it's a good illustration. When you have a problem, you go to the higher level and say, "Hey, we have this problem. We need electricity in Alabama, whatever it's going to be, right?" And so in the military example, you would go to the higher commander and say, "Hey, we have this problem. Not enough electricity. We don't have the resources here in house to handle this." And you elevate it up to, in this case, it would be the federal level, right? Like this is, we think, a national problem. And then the boss looks around and he's like, "You guys are the only one that have this problem. This isn't a brigade or a corps or an army problem or a federal problem. This is a regional problem. I wonder what we can do to focus on you guys and the resources that you might have already in house."
Doing it yourself. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. How do you?
Idea.
Yeah.
Now, in fact, Henry Ford volunteered as to take the Southeast as a problem and keep it in the private sector and develop the energy throughout the area. And in fact, it was going on with Commonwealth and Southern, but FDR nixed it and said no.
Aaron Hook wrote a nice little question or something. Am I right in thinking Richard's argument is that over the past century, the U.S. moved from being a parliamentary republic where Congress is dominant and the president is out of politics to a presidential republic where while the White House dominates politics, Congress largely dysfunctional, rubber stamp that is rarely able to?
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
They are what Congress does, all the agencies underneath the federal executive branch, pretty much their budgets are rubber stamped. That's a great way to put it. They have in place cost of increases. And so what the Congress does is just okay the budget. Whenever you see the budget's going to be $3.5 trillion. Well, that's Congress's rubber stamp on all the agencies doing what they've always been doing the past 50 years, 100 years. And that's all in the executive branch of government. And so the Congress becomes little other than a complaint department.
Right.
They do not spend their time debating which agencies are useful, why they're useful, what they do, how are they failing.
Yeah.
Do you ever hear of that?
No. Come on.
But that is in fact. So let's take a look at the Obama era. During the Obama presidency, over 20,000 rules were made by agencies with the effect of laws. That's out of the executive branch, which is not supposed to make law.
Right.
During the same period, the legislature of the United States created just over 400 laws. Most of it was housekeeping sort of laws. So where is the power residing? It's really rather clear.
Yeah. Not with the folks who are supposed to write the laws, right?
Right.
Has the ship sailed on all this stuff? Is it possible? Can we, as a people, tolerate the hard work and the lack of comfort of fixing this and getting and look, having the responsibility of managing our own power, our own lives?
Yeah, it would be it would necessitate a generation dedicated to reversing power back to states and localities.
Right.
It would take a great idea and determination, and it would take in the DNA of democracy. I delighted in how the revolution was fought. Why? Because everybody had their place. It took everybody to win that war. So right. Sam Adams, the brewer, had to be a firebrand, and John Adams had to be in personnel and determine Thomas Jefferson was the perfect guy to write the Declaration of Independence, right? Washington, of course, was Washington. But Nathaniel Greene was one of Washington's greatest generals during the war. But Washington knew there was only one man who could deal with the problem of supply. And so he had to go to Nathaniel Greene and say, look, I have to take my best commander off the field. You're better at supply than anybody I have. And he, with great humility, said, I'll do it to serve the cause. But it's one cause. So it has to be an idea like that. Everybody has to agree on liberty, before anything else. Not power, not money. It has to be common liberty.
One of the people you left out, and there's a lot of them, are farmers. And you're like, hey, man, we're going to have you winter over, no shoes, fighting.
No kidding. Yeah.
You know? And by the way, we're not going to pay you. And your farm, probably can't help you with that. Right? And so, again, this goes back to us. Like, do we have the backbone to say we're going to elect somebody not based upon party, but based upon trying to some of this going in the right direction? Or are we just irrevocably going in this kind of, I don't know, I'll just call it a malaise where like,
well, it is something about power, and I go into it a little bit in the front of the book. Power assumes more power. It concentrates.
right.
It's always moving out of its boundaries. That was the whole intent of the Constitution, was to create barricades beyond which a federal government would not go. And so for the past 100 years, those barricades have been coming down. And that is the problem.
Is there a history of that being fixed? Kind of the same question.
No, there was a writer back in the Revolutionary era who studied all the democracies in history. A lot of them were Greek, but also the Roman. And he determined that the turning point of every democracy to its downturn, to its end, was when they discovered how they could plunder the common treasury, when they could get all wealth in one place and then determine how it's spent.
Yeah.
They plunder it. And it sounds like where we are. So it's a good question.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah. And it's not just you and I that are frustrated.
Yeah, yeah.
So it has to do with election after election after election and knowing what you're fighting for.
We're going through this thing here in California where the state is compelling towns to change the nature of how they run their business in terms of housing, right? And look, we have a housing problem here, but forcing towns to like ask people. Okay, here's the thing we've learned in my lifetime. I'm 52 years old, right? Housing projects created by the government do not work. We've learned this.
Excuse me, they suck.
Exactly. Yeah. So what does California want to do? They're like, we're going to build housing projects. They're not calling them housing projects because we know it sucks, but they're saying, we're going to mash a bunch of people who don't have enough resources. We're going to put them into the same area. We're going to put them squarely downtown so they don't ever need a car. And you're just like, oh my God, and this is not in San Francisco. This is throughout the state where they're compelling. Like, you have land, it must be used for this. Otherwise, you don't get any money.
Yes. Well, that's the mirror of the federal government. That's do what we tell you or you don't get your money back.
Yeah.
That is so it's the inverse of how our country was created. Our country was created to let localities be localities, states be states, regions be regions, and so an inversion has happened.
The other problem with this, when you have a top-down leadership, top has no idea what the bottom. Whatever's happening at the federal level, you have no idea what it's like to live in Uvalde, Texas. People didn't even know where Uvalde, Texas was 4 months ago.
Yeah.
They had no idea, no clue on how to help them. And this is the same model we used. This is why we also failed in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had this approach where the State Department was going to never go out into the society and try to understand what was going on and trying to help fix these things. We completely failed as a military and also failed our international partners to develop a reliable, repeatable system to create capacity within these new governments that we are setting up. The idea, great. The execution, horrible. The training, non-existent. And so, why are we doing it? We're not doing it any differently here now. I mean, I've tried to look at the government in the same way, and I'm like, is there a difference between how we went and screwed up Iraq and Afghanistan and how we're doing things here? And I got to tell you, there's not. There's just people that make wide assumptions. I worked on a walking committee for a county. It's a subcommittee under transportation. They want people to walk. And then you look at the assumptions from the government employees, and I'm like, you don't have any data to drive this. And like
they were making assumptions from thin air, Pete.
Yes. Is that
their imagination?
Yeah. They
Yeah.
read a book from someone's theory, and they're like, so we have these things called bulb outs, and a lot of areas have them where they try to reduce the area that a human crosses a street. And what happens is first off, there's no evidence that it was dangerous in that intersection anyhow. And second, cars now hit the curb that wasn't there before. And really, it's all just about punishing car owners, making it less and less desirable to own a car, harder to park, less space to drive. And so people will be forced to
Think about what you're saying. Think about what you're saying there.
yeah.
People shouldn't own cars.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
that's their assumption. People shouldn't own cars. That's the real assumption. So we're going to make it as difficult as possible.
And then the reality is, if you live in West Texas, not only do you have to own a car, you have to own
a car. Good God.
Yeah, you have to have an extra gas tank on your truck, and you have to provision your own life because you can't.
Nobody else is there.
I left San Antonio and drove for 3 hours due west, and I got to the edge of Texas, and there was still more West Texas. Matter of fact, there were 200 more miles.
No, I've driven that.
Then I turned west. And I drove another 90 miles, and I was still nowhere near El Paso, but I was still in West Texas. So if you want to survive out there, when you go by dealerships, they're not car dealerships; they're truck dealerships. Sure, you can buy a car, but what do they sell? They sell trucks.
They need trucks. Yeah, they need trucks out there.
Right.
Well, this is, ideally, you're a country that doesn't make such assumptions out of thin air and decide by yourself that nobody should own a car.
Right.
I mean, it's really. And what is it now in California? They're not going to send gasoline fueled cars. They've decided that nobody should own one.
Yeah.
Who the hell are these people?
That
is un-American. You cannot tell a fellow American what they can and can't do.
Right.
That is utterly opposite to America.
Yeah.
So first, I think we need to decide what is America? I don't think many people know anymore.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, and look, I'm a big fan of Tesla. I think what they're doing is helpful, which is also illustrative because politically they're not favorable to the party that's currently in power, and so they push. Even though they have all the data and all the data,
suddenly they're not popular. Suddenly,
yeah, it's it's crazy. So they push down. The president won't even say the word Tesla, even if he's talking about he won't say it, which is like I can't take people. This is both sides. I cannot take you seriously because you don't act like serious people.
It's like
and then if you're going to take away my gas card, tell me I'm not allowed to have one. What about my electric car that's controlled ultimately by somebody else? There's a software agreement. Oh, you can't use your car. Now you've taken my car away altogether.
It goes much further than that, Pete. I'm afraid this whole climate change business is about businesses having to retrofit every building they're in. It's about you as a homeowner having to retrofit your home to exactly the way they want your home to be. And then they will tell you what your thermostat should be to. They will tell you how many windows you can have. I mean, it's bizarre and it's controlling and it's un-American. It's just not America.
And the thing is like in our house, we want to be good stewards of the earth.
Yes, everybody does. Who doesn't? Name somebody who doesn't.
I'll tell you someone who doesn't. Someone who gets their face kicked in by the government telling them they're an asshole and a piece of shit. They have to get a vaccination. Look, I'm vaccinated, right? But when you tell people they're stupid and dumb and you force them to do something,
it's all a symptom of the same. It's the same thing. It's what the book is. It's concentration of power and assumption of power, and assuming you have it at the expense of others.
Aaron is commenting. He left the EU because he didn't like the domination of power, basically here. That's what he's talking about.
Yes.
So when we look at all of these problems and we look at, we got elections coming up, and it appears today that the Republicans will sweep into power. And guess what's going to happen? They're not going to fix shit. It's just going to be
not going to go to the central problem. No.
Yeah. They'll be vindictive. We'll see the federal government probably trying to go after Joe Biden to impeach him and Kamala Harris because apparently impeaching people is a political tool.
Yeah, that's another symptom, Pete. That's another symptom. It really is going after political persecutions rather than using the democratic process.
Right.
to better things. Now, I'm seeing something here. All power resides in the European Commission and its agencies. That's exactly right. The EU is exactly like our federal government now, but they preside over all these different countries. And it's why Brexit happened, because they were getting into what Britons had decided on their own for the past 1,000 years since the Magna Carta. So Britons had had enough of that, and it's micromanagement from a central authority, and they're suffering it in every country in Europe.
The Magna Carta is great. Like, we've done this work already, right? We've already told the kings and the queens and the presidents, you're not divine, and you don't get to tell me who I am and what I get to be. Right? We've done this already.
It's in the DNA of democracy. That it goes into that fully. Every different change in the history of democracy is in that book, and how it evolved and became who we are supposed to be. And we've just been going in a retrograde. It's from Woodrow Wilson. He was a student of German ideal state theory, which came out of the philosophy of Friedrich Hegel. And it's all about administrative state power and perfecting a technocracy, which is contrary to an idea of government by representation. It's contrary to the idea. And it's what our administrative state has been built on for 100 years. So you have an administrative state that is of one philosophy, and you have a representative government that's of another. And the representative government is losing the power play.
Now, we see a tide change, right? Florida is saying, hey, school districts and teachers, you don't get to keep a bunch of secrets from parents. You need to be more open.
Imagine that.
Right. And this, of course, is vilified, and because it's not about the actual problem, it's about politics, right? So we'll set the politics part aside, but then you get into within that argument of, hey, the parents are in charge of their kids' well-being and education. You guys are the vehicle to teach them. We appreciate you doing that. By the way, most schools in Florida are horrible. So, let's try to fix the quality of education problem. And so within that, there's chicanery as to, okay, well, we adhere to the letter of the law, but really we've changed what the words mean in the law. And so we're not going to do what you say back in court. And you're fighting these things instead of just giving incredible education. And so you're seeing parents taking their kids out of school. You're seeing more private schools and charter schools start up. But even within that, there's just so much indoctrination, inculcation going on. And the federal government is how schools survive, right?
In the 1800s, Alexis de Tocqueville toured America, and he found something remarkable, that most of the area was rural, but it was the best educated population in the world.
Yeah.
Because it was a practical education provided by parents through teachers. The parents, mainly the mothers, controlled education. And also the spiritual phases of life. Yeah. They were largely in the hands of the feminine in America, and did well. Now it's in the hands of the government. And the government is concerned about you learning what the government wants you to learn, not what might be practical.
Right.
It's changed.
Again, I've been reading this.
Another symptom, Pete. It's another symptom.
Oh, another symptom, right? Yeah. So again, I've been reading Laura Ingalls Wilder and books about her and everything. I find her fascinating. And this
a real American personality.
Right. Yeah. And look, some of her stuff is fiction, but it's based on the truth. So we'll just, we see this all the time. So we're just going to go with it. But she teaches school at 15 years old. Why? Well, because she passed the boards, and the community's like, yeah, this is a good girl. We know her dad down the road. You're 12 miles away from her hometown. To them, a million miles away. But, you can communicate 12 miles. It's not a problem. And so she sat down. She started working at 15 kids, but she had to be a good kid, had to have good references, had to pass the boards and everything. But she's teaching people. And then she talks about how, they had these societies where they would get together as a very small town, and they would read whatever it was that they were going to read. And they would spend time thinking and philosophizing. And I'm not making them out to be saints, But
Yes.
what I'm saying is they spent time in the classical method of learning and exposing themselves to thought, and they could disagree and get along. Disagree tonight when they're talking about whoever it's going to be, but then the next day go out and work on surviving the winter together because it was hard. It was hard as
Yes.
well. It wasn't time for a bunch of bullshit.
Right. Well, America allowed for the spectrum of belief, the whole spectrum. And so now there is, I suppose, a doctrine of belief developing. So when that happens, it's not good either.
One of the things that we've learned, access to all the information, we don't have access to much wisdom, and again, we don't have access to backbone.
Access to what? I'm sorry, Pete. I didn't catch that.
Backbone. Like
Yeah.
resolve and saying, hey, yes, adversity is going to hit you, but I'm going to have to keep going no matter what I do. We all have adversity. We all have these things that come at us, but our ability to withstand it, our capability to put it on somebody else, this is your fault. This, instead of saying, how do I make myself resilient to
Yes.
food or saving money or becoming more employable, all of these things because we have this great eye in the sky helping us, hey, this really is on me, and when I need help, sure, there can be some federal help there, but
No, it used to be your family. It used to be your town. It
Right.
used to be your hometown, right? And that's another chapter in the book. It's about levying reliance. It used to be self-reliance. The government levied reliance to itself through, I think it was Roosevelt's 1944 address, in which he defined a new and second Bill of Rights, which gave the federal government a right to invade everybody's life to create happiness for them, which was never a part of what government should do. That's your pursuit. That's what you're talking about. Why aren't I doing it?
Yeah, right.
That creates individual strength.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a lot
levying that away to the government has created national weakness.
Yeah, and waste. It's an inefficient system.
Huge waste. Good God. $22 trillion. It's measured. $22 trillion.
Our government spends $1 trillion like it's nothing, like they're in a damn strip club
over a breakfast.
Yeah,
Biden did that when he signed the. We're just going to forgive this debt. It's going to be on the taxpayer. Oh, it might be $1 trillion. Oh, so what?
Yeah,
that's real money to some people.
And hiring 80,000 new agents. Granted, maybe the IRS needed a few more agents. We'll give him that. But I don't know. There's a lot of people in the front. If you want to hire more federal government people, how about some of these young kids? Here's your forgiveness program. You're going to work in a department.
You're going to work. Yeah, you're going to work. And we'll take care of some of these people in the 10 cities that we've approved.
Yeah,
in Seattle and San Francisco and Portland. Oh, those are doing lovely.
Oh my God!
What great examples of American know-how.
So when we learn,
Pete, we're two countries. We're one that believes in tent cities, and we're one that believes in self-reliance, and we're become very divided that way.
When does the federal government need to step in, though? Like, how do you have something that really is state of the art? Okay, freedom is one thing, but hey,
when Spain invades Georgia, when Spain invades Florida, that's what the federal government's supposed to do. Yeah, that's all they were ever supposed to do.
But to be fair, though, like again, I'm reading a little.
And keep commerce fair between states.
When the Ingalls family is out there pioneering, families are failing and moving west, and so somebody's building them a rail line. Somebody is managing the grant process, moving up a claim. So there is some federal involvement in this stuff, right? There is some aid. There is a goal. I mean, in a good way, like, hey, there's a way to prevent something. Social Security can be a good thing. I'm not sure that it is, but these things exist because not everybody's life is going to run perfectly, right? There's going to be challenges. People are going to get cancer. And so, like, you shouldn't have to be penalized with bankruptcy because you got cancer, right? And so
No, that's very true. But how much of the price of healthcare is because everyone who deals in healthcare has to deal with a bureaucracy.
Oh yeah, no,
Washington.
it's
They have to play by the rules, and those that the government doesn't like, they fine, and those they do like, they give money to. They did. James Hill built the railroads going west for Laura Ingalls. James Hill, he was a private entrepreneur, much like Henry Ford created the Model T.
yeah.
That was done by private persons. Southern and Commonwealth was creating utilities in the Southeast, opening investment, opening jobs, opening the way to heat and light. And the government decided it had to do it.
So the argument against that is that you need the government to own the utilities because private companies will constantly raise rates and make it more and more expensive.
The opposite is true. Everywhere the government goes, prices go through the roof. Look at healthcare. Look at the cost of a university education. It's quadrupled in the last several years. Look at the cost of energy now. This is a perfect example. Where they go, when they go to make prices affordable, they increase the cost by multipliers. It's
they're an inefficient system. It turns out they're not good to oil.
When they get into something, they destroy it. They destroy the ability of normal people to afford it. A college education used to be between a family and a local banking institution who said, you had the example of Laura Ingalls. She and her father would come into the bank and say, I think Laura has some talent. I'm willing to spend the next 20 years of my life paying off a loan so Laura can go to college. Now you can't get a loan unless the federal government approves. They control 100% of the student loan market.
By the way, there's no hey, you're going to have to make a better decision. I mean, I don't know how many. We have a very good state school system here, and kids routinely go to another state's state school and pay out-of-state tuition. You can't be frivolous. You can absolutely go to community college. You can absolutely get a world-class degree, but you don't have to go to where your heart's content is. And shit, man, you're 17. Why are you? Nobody would sell a kid a house, right? At 17, they'd be like, you know what? Why don't you go to the state school and get a degree? Well, I'm really, really smart. Well, why don't you see what kind of help you can get at whatever schools? Well, why are you going
People used to work their way through school, and state tuitions used to be very affordable. I know. I did that.
And
it was very affordable in Texas back when I went to school there.
Yeah. How many kids get a degree and never work within the field of study? Because again, at 17, 18,
yeah,
you don't have enough sense. So I agree with you that we've got to do a better job and push some of this responsibility down. But I also look. I don't want people to suffer needlessly. I don't mind pitching in my share to help. Hey, let's make sure we take care of people. I think we have a great thing in our country where we have they call it neural diversity. Where kids that have the ability to earn money but have autism, maybe autism.
Yeah.
But in this one area, they're they can work. They'd be computer programmers, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in Azerbaijan. That doesn't happen in.
No, that's a wonderful American trait, helping others.
Right.
And that how should just be done outside the government. Why does the government?
How high can it go? How high can we pool our resources? For a federal, we weren't supposed to have a standing army, but we have one now. We have a behemoth, right? And so, how high do you allow resources to go before it no longer impacts that community?
I think states are great, 50 great laboratories for doing just what you're talking about. Take it back to the states.
Yeah.
And let them, just for a start.
What states do you think run their stuff well?
I think Texas does. Florida does. Who's another good example? Another good example. Pennsylvania, Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah. Those sorts of states where the burden of taxation is less, where businesses are allowed to do what is prudent, what is in their interest to provide the public with goods. Just stay out of it.
Yeah, it's frustrating to hear these things and to realize that we do have the power within our hands. It's like we need we need term limits. Well, all we got to do is vote the person out.
That's not the problem.
Right.
The problem isn't the politicians are in office for 4 or 6 or 12 years. The problem is the persons in the agencies are in the agencies for their entire lives. That's millions of people dedicated to their own government. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to do with the politicians. It has to do with the administrative state that works in its own interest now.
So when someone like Donald Trump
still accumulating power every day,
right,
they're searching for ways to gain more power, more money, more control. That's what they do.
Donald Trump says, if I get elected, I'm going to fire most of the federal government or whatever thing he says.
That's why he's a threat. That's why they're searching for a crime.
Yeah.
He's only he and Ronald Reagan were two persons who said there's something wrong here with this bureaucracy. It's too big. And they are a threat. Ronald Reagan was put off as stupid. And Donald Trump is put off as criminal. It's very telling. Bushes are fine. The Bushes grew up in government. Of course they're accepted. They're acceptable. They know the game. So
yeah, man, it's frustrating, and it's always frustrating, but a good conversation to chat with you.
The problem in America is there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah,
you're supposed to be the hope.
Here's the Shadows of the Acropolis, and look, these are fantastic reads. Here's the thing that again, this goes back to education. We got all these people that are so educated. But when you talk about the fact that we have 3 founding documents that protect 3 individual liberties, right? Like people like protest 4th of July because they weren't free. Like, no, we're free. That's national freedom that we're celebrating. We're free from everybody else. The Bill of Rights protects personal freedom.
Right.
The Constitution protects political freedom. There's that concept alone. People aren't able to even hang with that if they even know it, right?
Right.
So
Pete, how many people know that? Very few.
Very few.
That's not what they're teaching today.
Yeah. But these documents, they have a lot of great stuff in them, but there's flaws in there too.
Well, here's something I was alarmed by this morning. This morning I saw a busload of people get off, illegal aliens in Chicago. They were bused there by the governor of Texas. In the colleges today in Chicago, they're teaching that Venezuela's form of government is good. All the persons who got off that bus were from Venezuela. They're not teaching about the virtues of American government. They're teaching about the virtues of socialism. And it is contrary to the entire history of humanity. Socialism is tyranny, plain and simple.
How many revolutions have there been in Venezuela since we've been alive? Literally like one every 15 years.
One per decade, I was going to say.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes 2 in a year. It's crazy.
Yeah, but socialism is being taught, despite the constant example of history. Socialism is being taught as a practical and good form of government. It is not. It's all the same. It's tyranny.
When you hear the examples of, say, Sweden or the Nordic countries, we often lose sight of the fact that U.S. is a self-selected melting pot of people from everywhere. Yeah. El Salvador to Vietnam, right? Anything in
South Africa to Laos.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so we don't get to apply the same rules to this wonderfully diverse place. And there's another thing, and I think we talked about this before too. Antonyms are things like unity and diversity. Like they're different words. They mean different things. Yeah. And you can't have both things. You can't go forward in one direction. We all want to go towards climate change. Well, we don't get along like that because we're a wonderfully diverse country.
Yeah, our country was literally designed on the idea of diverse peoples being able to live in one nation. And it had to do with autonomy, local and state autonomy and individual autonomy. The individual having a power unto himself that was not attackable. So America is very unique that way. But when you hear people speak, oh, we have to be unified on this, look out. Why is there no unity? Listen to Biden about unity. He wants to be unified about attacking half the country.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's just a bunch of nonsense. And listen, quite honestly, both sides do this stupid stuff.
Yeah. The rhetoric is getting worse, and that's another symptom.
Yeah.
The prize is so big in controlling one office of government, it drives people crazy. It's like the Lord of the Rings. The closer you get to that ring, the crazier you get to possess it.
Yeah. Is there a politician you like?
A politician I
not
like.
A person, but like, hey, you know what? This guy, this lady, they got it.
You mean today?
Today.
I like Ron DeSantis. I like.
I heard he was stupid and a Nazi.
Of course he is, because he believes differently than persons in Washington like.
I watched the.
He's a hateful sort of fellow.
Yeah. I watched a very famous person completely denigrate anybody who didn't live in New York or California. And so here's the thing: I'm going to believe that person. I believe that you think I live in California. I believe that you think these people are stupid.
Doesn't he know Biden's from Delaware?
What's that?
He doesn't know Biden is from Delaware.
Yeah, this person. Yeah. Well, they were being very regionally aligned, and they probably don't care about Delaware, and they probably don't know where Delaware or the capital of Delaware or any history of Delaware. They don't care about these things, right? They just want to dismiss. And the thing that you see a lot as we try to sort through this, you see this stuff that has been done throughout history, and it's like this stuff like when it's done towards the Jewish faith, and you see Jewry put out there, and you try to minimalize and animalize, people. You see the same things happening politically, both sides, and so we're not in a position to actually do any progress because there's no leadership to.
Yeah, it's shut down.
That direction.
Yeah, it's shut down. Where there's supposed to be collegiality, it's shut down. That's another symptom. It's treating others as other and lesser. Therefore, they shouldn't be heard from.
I'm looking in your book right now for the chapter that has the answer.
It's diffusion of power. That's the answer. Diffuse power back to the states, back to localities, back to individuals, and get the federal government on a leash. It needs one. Yeah.
So I had my buddy Matt Ho on. He was actually the last show we did. It was the yesterday morning show this time. And look, here's a stand-up guy, a guy that has great character, great integrity. He's a Marine. He stood up. Yeah, he worked in the same province that I did in Afghanistan a couple years prior to me, and he stood up for this cushy State Department job and said, "I can't do this. What you guys are doing is wrong." And so he publicly called him out and quit. And so he has these great, right? Yeah, it's great. Of course, you never hear about him in the news. He's not a big hero, right? You can certainly look him up, but you have to know to look for him, right? He's not put up as a Greta Thunberg or somebody like that, right?
Yes.
So here's the thing, though, is he's a Green Party candidate, and I love this guy. And I'm like, how do I vote for? I'm not from North Carolina where he's running for senator, and really, let's be honest, he's not going to get elected there because the system is entirely designed to completely smash out other parties.
Right.
But here's a guy that I would love to see win because I believe in who he is and the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
So politically, maybe we're in 15% agreement. Maybe it's even 25, right? But there's big differences between how we think that we're going to solve these problems. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's another symptom. The two parties used to play between the 40-yard lines. I heard someone put it that way.
Uh-huh.
Now it's goal line and goal line.
Yeah.
It's goal line defense, right? You're defending
because they take you to court to kick you out, and you got to go back to court with them, and they'll just fight you until
they have money to do it. They have money to do it.
Yeah, they want the whole damn stadium and the girls in the
and the concessions and
right. Yeah, and then we're left with these candidates that deserve a chance to be heard by the people.
Yeah.
And, what's one thing I want to try to do is let candidates come on and talk to them, and maybe we'll do debates, maybe not.
It's a great service, Pete.
Right.
I'm one citizen who
Yeah,
had an idea a number of years ago, what's going wrong? Why is this happening?
Yeah.
And so I had to go back to know what was right, to find out what was wrong. So it's been an odyssey, but that's one citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not worked as designed, and hopefully we can all get along long enough to I don't know. I don't know.
The way it was originally set up is that somebody from Massachusetts would get along with somebody from Florida.
Yeah.
And have one would be a fisherman, the other is a lawyer.
Yeah.
And they had one common interest, their common liberty, and their common form of government that they both agreed on that would leave them both alone.
Yeah.
That was
me and my buddy Matt. He can be a socialist Green Party person, and I can be more of a libertarian middle guy. And we can be friends, and I can respect the dude that he is and that he wants to do the right thing. He's just got a different kind of shovel than I do.
Yeah.
We don't have to hate each other. I don't have to call him names or say he's stupid. I think he's brilliant. I love that he's what they're doing.
Sounds like a guy I'd love to share a beer with, actually.
Well, let's do a show together at some point. All right, I'm going to wrap this thing up, man. You've been awesome. Everybody should. Where's that book of yours? Here it is, right here. And look, I love.
Hold on.
Yeah.
This is volume 1. This is volume 1. This will tell you how our democracy was built and why.
That's right.
Volume 2 will tell you how we've gotten away from that.
Get the DNA of democracy. That's the other book. And also look on the Break It Down show. Just type in Richard Lyons. You'll see he's been on several times. And man, I dig talking to you. Any closing thoughts?
It's an old phrase, knowledge is power. But we need to know what country we're supposed to be and where we are today in order to make informed decisions at the ballot box.
A couple of comments coming in here. Let's hear it. Dickie, hey, what up, Dickie? Saying peace. And back to the start for me. Dickie, thank you so much. Everybody, support the Break It Down show. Buy Richard's books. And get ready to do the row from Derna. We start on the 10th. Row to Derna, 520 miles, 50 days. Go to borderrowers.com. Get that rower thing and just start yanking at your gym. All right. And if you guys want to be on my team, let me know. I'm going to finalize my team in the next couple of days. All right, everybody. Take care. Stand by, Richard. Hey, thanks for watching this show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.